Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I am Tom Goehle, the son of Hugo Goehle. And I have a real hard time doing things in third person since my life is so intertwined with his. So I want to be able to tell his story. And for those of you who can't see, this was one of his Ash Creek softball uniforms. And yes, my dad grew up in Ash Creek. And he was born in Steen, Minnesota. And he lived in Steen for 10 years. Prior to being in Steen, how he got to Steen, his dad was a pastor, Pastor Theodore Goehle. His first call was to Pender, Nebraska, later to Fairmont, to Edgerton, and then he got a call in 1918 to go to Steen. And was in Steen from 1918 to 1934. He also farmed. And so they had a place in Ash Creek. My dad was one of 12 brothers and sisters. And so, large family. But the activity of choice in Ash Creek, by far, was softball. And so, fast pitch softball is what he grew up playing. I only knew of green and yellow uniforms. I remember him talking about that, and we found those. And when I was able to dig through some of his stuff lately, I did find Ash Creek uniforms that were red and white. And I really thought that was reserved for Steen, because I would hear about the battles between Steen and Ash Creek and how the whole community would come together, and it was the social outing each week of sorts. And so, but it was really awesome to go through that. The other thing I really have to share with you, in order to know my dad, you have to know our family. And I talked about my grandpa Theodore Goehle, and this is I just want to read two lines that he had in one of his prayers. It said, "Gracious Heavenly Father, everything we are and have we owe to your merciful goodness. Accept our thanks for these bounties. We especially thank you for accepting us into your great family through faith in Christ Jesus. We also thank you for giving us parents who loved you and nurtured us in your love. We thank you for the many loved ones you have given us in the Goehle family." Family was rich, really rich heritage for us, and we are so grateful for that. And one of the things with his siblings, most of them grew up in and around Laverne, and he went to high school in Laverne. And as a matter of fact, this would be my dad's Letterman's jacket from Laverne in 1942. He was very active in FFA, baseball, basketball, football. Went on to Worthington Junior College, spent 2 years there. And while he was at Worthington Junior College, he played football and basketball. He loved baseball as well. They didn't have a college baseball team, so he played for the Worthington Cubs, the amateur team there in Worthington. After that, if you haven't figured, there's a gap there. He didn't start college till 1947. He graduated high school in 1942, World War II. He did not go, but his 5 older brothers were at war, and the youngest sibling wouldn't go. He stayed at home and worked on the farm in Ash Creek, and also helped take care of his sisters. And so it was after that he went to Worthington Junior College for 2 years. After that, he had the choice to go to St. Cloud State and play football and get an education. He wanted to become a teacher, or to go to the University of South Dakota. And he actually chose St. Cloud State, hopped on the train, got up there, was up there for a day, and he's like, no, this isn't for me. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't for him. He hopped on the train, came back, called the coach at USD, and USD said, hey, we'll still take you. So one of his brothers drove him to Sioux Falls. It's as far as he could get him. Drove him to Sioux Falls. He's got his little satchel bag, and he hitchhiked to Vermilion on Highway 77. That's how he got there. And he later went into the Hall of Fame in the University of South Dakota in 1981. He played football there. And so it was just a rich time. But it was after that he first started his job teaching and coaching. And he was at Lakefield High School in Lakefield, Minnesota for 2 years. And then he got a job in Hills in 1953. And if any of you are ever curious, at any point, my dad saved everything. So this is a scorebook from 1953-54. We have every scorebook from every team he's ever coached. For football, for basketball, we have anybody that's ran track, and you want to know the time they ran, he's got it recorded. He was a man of detail. My dad loved being active. He loved to challenge people. He loved to encourage people, and he was a disciplinarian. People talk about how he got a little softer as he got older, and so I was lucky, is what they told me. But he loved what he did, and he did what he loved. But I was really curious, so I went through the scorebook, and I'm like, well, who did he coach against that first game that he ever coached back in 1953? And lo and behold, they played Leicester, Iowa, and which later became Atkinson Interiors, and now I think Butterbraid is in that building, their school in Leicester. But they won 51-50. And I thumbed through the scorebook, and I got to the end of the scorebook. Oh yeah, he coached 7th and 8th graders too. And so, well, who did they play in their first 7th and 8th grade team? Oh, they played Steen. Steen still had a K-8 school. They won 31-29, but the leading score was from Steen, and it was Mr. Ray Hugeveen. And many of you know Ray. So just great, but that era was really unique because he was still living in Laverne, and it was at that time that Harvey Eitram was the superintendent here in Laverne, and Harvey made a trip to go out and to see Fort Randall Dam in Pickstown, South Dakota. And it had just been completed in 1954. And my mother was teaching in Pickstown. But the town was kind of drying up because the dam had been built, so everybody was leaving. And so she was working in her hometown of Bonesville, South Dakota at the Teepee, the little cafe. And in walks Harvey Eitram and his wife and another school board member and his wife. And they asked my mom what she does. She said, well, I used to teach there at Pickstown, but there's no school there anymore. Well, what do you teach? I taught 4th grade. And he's like, well, how would you like to come and teach 5th grade in Laverne? And so she did. And sometimes there's just divine appointments, right? And so my mom ended up in Laverne, and then that's where she met my dad. I have 3 older sisters and myself, and we are grateful that our parents met, obviously. But one of those things that came along with that is they moved to Hills, and my mom just recently celebrated her 89th birthday, and she is in the nursing home in Hills. And oddly enough, as she looks out her window, there is a garage there on the Tuff Home grounds that they keep for storage. That was part of the first home that my parents ever lived in. Who knew that they would go full circle for her? But we were fortunate living in Hills and growing up there. And Hills Blue Jays, right? But in 1964-65 is when they consolidated and became the Hills Beaver Creek Patriots. And one of the things my dad was pretty notorious for was his voice. Hear stories about he could probably strike fear in anybody just by saying your name, and you didn't know if it was good or bad. And if you ever ran track for him, and you had 200 meters left, 200 yards left, you'd hear, kick it in, kick it in. And meanwhile, you're just dying. But you wouldn't want to let my dad down. That was one thing. He would give his very best to everyone, especially his time. I know as a family, we would go travel. Number of vacations or softball in the summers. And speaking of softball, many are familiar with A.R. Woods here in Laverne years ago. And I did come across another uniform because when he played softball, he also played for A.R. Woods. And A.R. Woods had a division, thanks Charlie Goehle for helping clarify this, called AFSCO, Automatic Feeding Systems Company. It was a division of A.R. Woods. So he played for A.R. Woods. He continued to play. And he also played fast pitch softball for another group. This here is his lunchbox. So besides coaching and teaching for 38 years in Hills, he worked at IBP for 22 summers. He was there at 5 o'clock in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. And little did we know as kids, because he gave us all everything that he had, but he was back in time to play catch with us, to take us to games. But he also played fast pitch for the IBP team. And we were able to save his lunchbox, so we thought that was fairly unique as well. But it was in 1959, there's a unique story. There was the class gave him this little school bus as a memento. We're like, why on earth did the class of 1959 give him a school bus? Let me read it to you. You wouldn't believe it. This historical moment in the late 1950s, when the bus carrying the Hills Blue Jays boys track team, coached by Hugo Goehle, stalled on the railroad. With an oncoming train coming, the entire track team piled out of the bus to push it off its tracks and get it on its way again. Well, that's part of the story. The other part of the story is that my dad could encourage, he could challenge, but he could persuade. And he needed to get a good track team started. And for those that eventually came after and played football for him and played basketball for him, you ran track for him. It was just understood, right? But how he started getting kids out for track is, it would be the fifth period of the day. He would walk up to the study hall and he goes, "Who wants to get out of school early today? Who wants to get out early?" Everybody would raise their hand. He said, "All right, come with me." He'd load them up in the bus. He goes, "All right, you got to run 2 events today. We got a track meet." And that's kind of how the track thing got started. And that's a lot of ways how he persuaded, how he motivated. In 1979, they had a roast and toast for him in Hills after his 25 years of coaching, and that's where that came from. Every class told a different story. One of the stories, this is from Bloomington Trackorama in 1973. For those of you that are familiar with Howard Wood Dakota Relays, up in Bloomington, it was a massive track meet. It was the best of the best. And my dad loved bringing our track team up there to be challenged and to put them on a bigger stage. But he also liked bringing them there because they would go to a Twins game. He would do the same in the fall of the year. He would always find a Gophers game to bring his football team to. He was about experiences, he's about life. And I know as a family, when we would travel, we always were like, if we stopped for gas, it wasn't like a 5-minute, 3-minute quick pit stop, like, oh, this is going to be another half hour. Because inevitably my dad would meet somebody he knows, and if he didn't meet somebody he knew, he would meet somebody new, and they would become friends, right? But that was one of the gifts of my dad. He would give you his time. He would definitely give you his time. And one of the things with that is he had in 1969, he had won his 100th football game. And this is actually the second time he won his 100th football game, because in 1968, he had also won his 100th football game. But later on at the end of the season, they realized there had been some partying, some drinking going on. The boys fessed up, taking accountability, which was huge, and which is still huge in today's world, and which makes this place and this region of the world great. But they owned up, and they had to forfeit all their games, forfeit their conference championship. And my dad wasn't afraid to take those 9 losses. But throughout the years, he actually had 6 undefeated teams. He had 7 teams with 1 loss. He won 9 conference championships. But all those years, people are like, oh, how many state titles? You know what? There were no state championships until 1972. It didn't exist in football in the state of Minnesota. All they did is they took the winning team from the conference in St. Paul against the winning team from the conference in Minneapolis, and that was your state champion. So it wasn't until after that they had that. So, but just a little unique piece of history with that. I was fortunate enough when I was a senior in high school. This is 1988. We were playing in Jasper, and my dad won his 500th high school basketball game. At the time of his retirement, in 1991, he was the winningest coach in the state of Minnesota. And he would tell you, fine, great. But it was more about the relationships, and it was definitely more about after the games. Inevitably, our house was full after basketball games. Whether it's the teachers, whether it's other coaches, whether it was his friends, whether it was the players and their families, they would come over and eat. And my mom is great at hospitality. The other thing that my mom did, she washed uniforms. So the first time when my dad was coaching, and they had a football game, and this is actually the first uniform with Hills Beaver Creek in 1964 season, all right? And this uniform is in pretty decent shape. As a matter of fact, I wore this jersey as part of the junior high football team in 1984. And they're like, how does that stay in good shape? I kid you not, my mom did the laundry for every sport for 47 years. She didn't know any better. She said, that's just part of the coach's wife's duty, right? And, but amazing to think. I share with you all those different things, but for me personally, one of the greatest memories is actually this was in 1996. I think thought it was 1993. My father passed in 1997 at the age of 72 of cancer. But in 1996, he and I had the chance. We went up to Minneapolis, and we went to the Metrodome. And there was an event called Promise Keepers. Some of you might remember that. And it was a chance for men to gather for praise and worship. And there were 60,000 people in the Metrodome doing it that day. And the speaker that day challenged the fathers to bless their sons and to pray over their sons. And it's still one of the richest memories I have personally is my dad praying over me and blessing me. And I think it's one of the richest heritages that we can give and that you can pass on to your children. But then in 1997, before his passing, my dad, who obviously loves sports, track, basketball, football, we got tickets to the Final Four in Indianapolis, and the Minnesota Gophers were playing. He grew up a Gophers fan. We grew up Gophers fans. And he was a hat wearer in the summer. He loved to go fishing, right? Lake Benton, Lake Curry, Graham Lakes. And I have to share this, bullheads. Like, I grew up on bullheads. I love bullheads. You give me a walleye or give me a bullhead, I'll take the bullhead. Learned how to skin those babies with the pliers, okay? But anyway, so we're out in Indianapolis, and the Gophers had gotten beat in the semifinals, and Trevor Winter, who was a Gopher, played up at Slayton. Well, I had played with his brother. My dad had coached against him, and he was able to get us tickets with the Gophers. So we sat right behind Arizona's bench. Arizona played Kentucky, and they beat them in double overtime. And for my dad, he was going through chemo treatments at the time, but it was 2 days that he felt great. And so we were able to go with our brother-in-laws. We took that in, and sitting down right a row in front of us to the side was John Wooden. And I think for my dad, I think he probably already died and thought he went to heaven at that point. So, but so many great memories, such a great legacy. But more than anything, it was all about the community and the family and the people that he grew up around. And like I said, he didn't stray far. He was born in Steen, lived his childhood years in Ash Creek, went to school here in Laverne, and spent his whole life in Hills, and he wouldn't trade it for anything. Thank you.